The great hall of the Vorthan Council buzzed with the usual sounds of galactic politics. Commander HFY stood at his assigned position, his blue-scaled hands clasped behind his back as he watched the other species debate trade routes and territorial boundaries. The Kalari delegates whispered among themselves in their musical language, their tall, pale forms swaying slightly as they spoke. The Nexari representatives counted something on their datapads, always focused on profit margins and shipping costs. The Threnodi sat in complete silence, their insect-like bodies perfectly still, participating only when directly addressed. This was how the galaxy worked. 4 species, 4 territories, 4 different ways of thinking. The Vorthans controlled the military zones with their superior weapons and warrior culture. The Kalari managed the research sectors with their advanced science and long lifespans. The Nexari dominated the trade lanes with their mathematical minds and business skills. The Threnodi kept to themselves in the outer regions, emerging only when absolutely necessary. It had been this way for 300 years. It was a system that worked even if it wasn't perfect. Each species stayed in their lane, respected the boundaries, and maintained the peace through careful balance. Wars were small and contained. Trade flowed smoothly. Research continued at steady pace. The galaxy was stable, predictable, and safe. Commander HFY had served in this council for 20 years. He had seen countless debates about mining rights, shipping disputes, and research agreements. Today seemed like it would be another routine session until the ancient Kalari historian Veltar requested permission to speak. Tar was old even by Kalari standards. His white hair reached the floor, and his pale skin seemed almost transparent. He had spent centuries studying old texts and forgotten legends from across the galaxy. Most council members considered his work interesting but irrelevant to modern politics. Ancient history was fine for academic discussions, but it had little bearing on current affairs. Honored delegates, Veltar began in his soft voice, I bring before you a matter of great importance. For the past 50 years, I have been researching what we call the human myth. Several council members shifted in their seats. The human myth was one of those old stories that appeared in the folklore of dozens of worlds. Like most myths, it was considered entertaining, but fictional. Parents told their children stories about the mysterious 5th species that supposedly once traveled the stars. Artists created sculptures and paintings of the bipedal creatures with their strange adaptability and fierce independence. Historians noted the stories in their records, but filed them under legend rather than fact. These stories appear on worlds throughout our territories, Veltar continued, activating a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. Red dots appeared on hundreds of systems. On Vorthan military worlds, they tell tales of warriors who could adapt their fighting styles to any opponent. On Kalari research stations, they speak of scientists who could master any field of study. On Nexari trade hubs, merchants whisper about beings who could negotiate with anyone and understand any culture. Even on Threnodi worlds, the stories exist, describing survivors who could thrive in any environment. Commander HFY found himself paying attention despite his skepticism. The distribution pattern was odd. Myths usually stayed close to their origin points, but these human stories seem to exist everywhere. The consistency is remarkable, Veltar said, his voice growing stronger. Across different cultures, different languages, and different time periods, the descriptions remain similar. Bipedal mammals, average height between Kalari and Vorthan sizes. They possess technology that seemed to violate our understanding of physics. Their ships could change configuration during combat. Their weapons adapted to different targets. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to excel at everything rather than specializing in one area. A Nexari delegate raised one of his forearms. Honored Veltar, these are clearly primitive stories created by species before they understood the principles of evolutionary specialization. No species can be good at everything. The Vorthans excel at warfare because they evolved for combat. We Nexari excel at trade because our minds developed for complex calculations. The Kalari excel at research because of their patient nature and long lifespans. The Threnodi excel at survival because of their harsh homeworld. Every successful species finds their strength and focuses on it. That is exactly what troubles me, Veltar replied. These stories describe a species that never specialized. They remain generalists. According to the legends, they could be warriors when needed, scientists when required, traders when beneficial, and survivors when necessary. They adapted to situations rather than forcing situations to adapt to them. The council chamber fell, quiet. The idea was disturbing because it challenged everything they knew about evolution and civilization. Specialization was the key to success. A species that tried to do everything would master nothing. It was basic biology and sociology. Commander HFY felt a chill run down his spine despite his skepticism. Even if such beings existed, he said slowly, they would be extinct by now. A species without focus cannot compete with species that have perfected their strengths. Where are these humans now if they were so adaptable? That is the mystery, Veltar admitted. The stories all end the same way. The humans simply vanished. No great war, no plague, no natural disaster. They just stopped appearing in the legends. Some stories suggest they withdrew to the edge of known space. Others claim they destroyed themselves in some internal conflict. Most simply say they faded, away like morning mist. A Threnody delegate spoke for the first time, his voice like rustling leaves. Old stories told by primitive minds. We are the evolved species now. We divide the galaxy between us because we represent the highest forms of intelligent life. These human myths are entertainment for children, nothing more. The other delegates murmured agreement. It was a comforting thought. The current system worked because it was based on natural law. Each species had found their place through evolution and intelligence. The galaxy belonged to those who had earned it through superiority in their chosen fields. But Veltar was not finished. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected unusual energy signatures at the edge of charted space. The readings don't match any known propulsion technology. The patterns are unlike anything in our databases. Commander HFY felt that chill again, stronger this time. Are you suggesting these readings are connected to your human research? I am suggesting nothing, Veltar replied carefully. I am merely noting that sometimes legends contain more truth than we wish to believe. Perhaps it would be wise to investigate these signals more carefully. The council session ended with the usual bureaucratic delays and committee assignments. The energy signatures would be studied, reports would be filed, proper procedures would be followed. It was how the galaxy maintained its careful order. But as the delegates filed out of the chamber, Commander HFY found himself thinking about adaptability and specialization. What if the myths were real? What if somewhere in the dark between stars the humans had been watching and waiting? What if they had never really disappeared at all? He pushed the thoughts away. The galaxy belonged to the evolved species now. That was simply how things were. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the stars shift on the main display as his ship moved through space at speeds that would have amazed the ancient explorers of Earth. Behind him, his crew worked quietly at their stations, each one focused on their tasks but ready to adapt at a moment's notice. This was how humans worked best, Jake knew. They planned carefully but stayed flexible enough to handle whatever came next. The Defiant was the lead ship of humanity's first contact fleet, and Jake felt the weight of that responsibility every day. For 3 centuries, humans had lived in the shadows at the edge of known space, watching the 4 major species divide up the galaxy between them. They had seen the Vorthons expand their military zones, watched the Kalari establish their research networks, observed the Nexari build their trade empires, and noted how the Threnody kept to themselves in their isolated systems. It had been a long road to reach this point. The great civil war that had torn Earth apart 500 years ago had nearly destroyed humanity completely. Brother had fought brother, nation had fought nation, until the home planet was barely habitable and the human population was scattered across dozens of colony worlds. The survivors had learned hard lessons about cooperation and unity. They had rebuilt their civilization on principles of adaptability and mutual support rather than rigid hierarchy and specialization. While the 4 galactic species had grown comfortable in their separate roles, humans had spent centuries learning to be whatever the situation required. A human engineer could become a diplomat if needed. A human soldier could become a scientist when necessary. A human trader could become an explorer when opportunity called. It was not that humans were better at any single thing than the specialized species, but they could change and grow in ways the others could not. Lisa Rodriguez sat at the pilot station, her hands dancing across the controls as she monitored their approach to the border system. She had started her career as a maintenance technician, then trained as a pilot, and recently had been studying alien languages in her spare time. The other species would find such career changes confusing, but humans saw them as natural growth. "Captain," said Ben Clark from the engineering station, "all systems are running smooth. The adaptive hull plating is responding well to the local space conditions. We're invisible to most scanning technologies the galactic species use." Ben was typical of human engineering philosophy. Instead of building the biggest or most powerful systems, humans built smart systems that could change based on what was needed. The Defiant looked like a simple cargo ship on most scanners, but its hull could reconfigure for combat, exploration, or diplomatic missions depending on the situation. "Any word from the other fleets?" Jake asked. Amy Carter looked up from her communication station. "Fleet 2 is approaching the Kalari border. Fleet 3 is moving toward Nexari space. Fleet 4 is positioning near Threnody territory. All captains report their crews are ready for first contact protocols." The plan was ambitious but necessary. Humans had decided it was time to rejoin galactic civilization, but they would do it on their own terms. Instead of appearing weak and asking for permission, they would demonstrate their capabilities and offer partnership. Instead of revealing themselves gradually, they would make contact with all 4 species simultaneously, showing that they were not afraid of any single power. "Contact ahead," Lisa announced. 3 ships moving in formation. Configuration matches Vorthon patrol vessels. Jake nodded. "This is it, people. Remember, we're not here to fight, but we're not here to submit either. We're here to introduce ourselves as equals." The Vorthon patrol ships moved with military precision, their weapon systems clearly visible and ready for use. They had been designed for intimidation as much as combat, with sharp angles and aggressive styling that announced their purpose to anyone who saw them. As they approached the Defiant, their communications array activated. "Unknown vessel, you are in violation of Vorthon space boundaries. Identify yourself and state your business." Amy opened a channel. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. We are representatives of humanity, seeking peaceful contact with the galactic community." There was a long pause. Jake could imagine the confusion on the Vorthon bridge. Humanity was supposed to be a myth, a legend told to children. The patrol commander was probably checking databases and finding nothing. "Earth vessel, there is no record of your species in galactic databases. You will follow us to the nearest security station for processing and registration. Any resistance will be met with force." Jake exchanged glances with his crew. This was the moment they had trained for. The Vorthons expected submission or aggression, the only 2 responses they understood. Humans would give them something different. "Negative. 4th Hand Patrol. We appreciate your offer, but we must decline. We are on a diplomatic mission and cannot be delayed by administrative procedures. We're transmitting our credentials and request passage to continue our journey. Earth vessel, you will comply or face the consequences. Our weapons are trained on your ship." Jake sighed. The Vorthons were proving to be as predictable as human intelligence had suggested. They saw everything in terms of dominance and submission, strength and weakness. They could not understand a species that might be strong but choose peace. "Lisa, activate adaptive systems. Ben, bring defensive measures online. Amy, record everything for the historical archives." The Defiant's hull began to shift and change. Weapon ports opened along its sides, but more importantly, the ship's entire configuration altered. What had looked like a simple cargo vessel now appeared as something the Vorthon computers could not classify. The energy readings were unlike anything in their databases. The weapon signatures defied their understanding of physics. "Vorthon Patrol, we do not wish conflict, but we will defend ourselves if attacked. Please reconsider your position." The lead Vorthon ship fired a warning shot across the Defiant's bow. It was meant to be a show of force, a reminder of who controlled this space. Instead, it became the opening move in a battle that would change. Galactic History. Jake Quota's response was swift but measured. Lisa, evasive pattern alpha. Ben, return fire but target their engines only. Amy, keep broadcasting our peaceful intentions. The Defiant moved in ways that Vorthon tactics manuals said were impossible. It seemed to anticipate their shots, dodge their formations, and respond to their strategies before they could implement them. The human ship's weapons adapted during the fight, first firing standard energy blasts, then switching to electromagnetic pulses when the Vorthons raised their shields, then changing again to kinetic projectiles when they adjusted their defenses. Within minutes, all 3 Vorthon patrol ships had been disabled but not destroyed. Their crews were alive and unharmed, but their vessels were powerless and drifting. It was a level of precision that the warrior species had never seen before. Vorthon patrol, do you require assistance with repairs? The reply came after a long silence. What are you? Jake smiled grimly. We're human, and we're back. The news spread faster than light itself through the quantum communication networks that connected the galaxy. On Kalari Prime, the planet's greatest minds gathered in emergency session as reports flooded in from all 4 border regions. The humans had not made contact with just one species, but with all of them simultaneously. It was a coordinated effort that spoke of planning, intelligence, and capabilities far beyond what anyone had imagined. Dr. Veltar stood in the center of the great library, surrounded by floating holographic displays showing every piece of human mythology he had collected over the decades. Suddenly, the old stories seemed less like folklore and more like historical records. Young Kalari researchers worked frantically around him, cross-referencing the myths with the new reports coming in from the border encounters. Look at this, called out junior researcher Thailan, her voice filled with excitement and fear. The Vorthon report describes human ships that change configuration during combat, exactly like the war stories from the Kethron Nebula. The Nexari, traders are talking about human negotiators who seem to understand their cultural values instantly, just like the merchant tales from the spiral arm markets. Veltar nodded slowly, his ancient eyes reflecting the glow of the data streams. Each new report confirmed what he had suspected for years. The humans had never truly disappeared. They had simply stepped back and watched, learning about each species while remaining hidden themselves. It was a level of patience and strategic thinking that impressed even the long-lived Kalari. Meanwhile, in the corporate towers of Nexari Central, the merchant princes were having very different discussions. Trade Minister Kextar reviewed the EOI financial projections with growing excitement. A new species meant new markets, new resources, and new opportunities for profit. But the reports from their border encounter were troubling in their own way. The human ship appeared to be a simple transport vessel, reported Captain Yothron of the Merchant Patrol Prophet's Edge. But when we attempted to scan their cargo for customs assessment, their hull became transparent to our sensors while simultaneously blocking them. They showed us exactly what they wanted us to see while hiding everything else. Their negotiator understood our fee structures better than some of our own accountants. Kextar calculated the implications quickly. If humans possessed such advanced scanning technology and economic knowledge, they could revolutionize galactic trade or completely destroy the Nexari competitive advantage. Either they would become the most valuable partners in history, or the most dangerous rivals. On the fortress world of Vorthon Prime, War Commander Thokvar paced angrily in the strategy center as his analysts tried to make sense of the border skirmish reports. 3 patrol ships disabled without casualties, weapons that adapted faster than defensive systems could compensate, and tactics that seemed to predict Vorthon responses before they were made. How is this possible? Thokvar demanded, his scaled fists clenched. Our warriors train for decades to master combat techniques. Our ships carry the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. How does a species we thought was extinct defeat our patrols without even trying? His chief strategist, Commander Rexai, studied the tactical displays with professional interest despite his commander's rage. Sir, I don't think they were trying to defeat us. Look at the damage patterns. Every shot was precisely placed to disable without destroying. They could have vaporized our ships, but they chose not to. This was a demonstration of capability, not an attack. You think they were holding back? I think they were being gentle with us. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The Vorthans built their entire culture around military strength and warrior honor. The idea that another species might treat them with the kind of restraint shown to children was almost unbearable. In the deepest caves of Threnody space, the insect-like aliens gathered in their traditional councils of silence. They communicated through pheromone releases and subtle body movements, sharing information without words. The human contact at their borders had been different from the others. The human ship had simply appeared, broadcast a message of peaceful greeting, and waited patiently for a response. When the Threnody patrol ships approached with weapons ready, the human vessel had done something unprecedented. It had powered down all systems except life support and communications, making itself completely vulnerable. The message was clear. We trust you not to attack a defenseless ship. For the Threnody, who survived by being suspicious of everyone and everything. This gesture of trust was more shocking than any display of weapons would have been. No species in galactic history had ever made themselves defenseless in first contact situations. It spoke of confidence that bordered on insanity, or wisdom that transcended normal thinking. Dr. Helen Cross worked in the science bay of the UES, Defiant, analyzing the data her team had collected during their border encounters. As the fleet's chief xenobiologist, she had spent years studying the 4 galactic species from a distance. Now she was getting her first direct readings from their ships, their technology, and their biological signatures. Captain Morrison, she called over the intercom, you need to see this analysis. Jake arrived in the science bay within minutes, followed by several other senior officers. Helen had been one of the architects of the contact mission, and her insights were crucial to its success. What did you find, Helen? Something that explains everything, she replied, activating a holographic display that showed the evolutionary development of the 4 species. Look at these genetic and cultural patterns. Each species has become incredibly specialized, but they've lost something in the process. The display showed branching evolutionary trees for each species. The Vorthans had developed enhanced reflexes, improved muscle density, and brain structures optimized for tactical thinking, but they had lost flexibility in other areas. The Kalari had extended lifespans and enhanced memory capacity, but their emotional range had narrowed. The Nexari had developed mathematical processing abilities that surpassed most computers, but their creativity had diminished. The Threnody had perfected survival instincts and threat assessment, but they had lost the ability to trust or cooperate. They've all painted themselves into evolutionary corners, Helen continued. Each species is perfect at one thing, but limited in everything else. They can't adapt because adaptation would mean giving up their specialization. And humans? We're still generalists. We kept the ability to change, to learn, to become whatever the situation requires. What they see as impossible versatility, we see as normal human behavior. Jake studied the data with growing understanding. That's why they can't work together effectively. The Vorthans only know how to dominate or be dominated. The Kalari only know how to research and analyze. The Nexari only know how to calculate profit and loss. The Threnody only know how to hide and survive. Exactly. They've created a galaxy-wide system based on mutual limitation rather than mutual cooperation. Each species stays in their lane, because they literally cannot function outside it. The communication panel chimed with an urgent message from Fleet Command. Admiral Karen Phillips appeared on the screen, her expression serious but determined. All ships report successful first contact, she announced. Phase 1 is complete. The galaxy knows we exist. Phase 2 begins now. We're going to show them what cooperation actually looks like. The diplomatic vessel UES Harmony drifted silently in space, its hull torn open by Vorthon plasma cannons and its crew compartments exposed to the cold vacuum. Ambassador Greg Martinez and his entire diplomatic team were dead, victims of what War Prime Thokvar called a Preemptive defensive action against mythological threats to galactic security. Captain Lisa Chen received the news while commanding the defense of Nexari Trade Hub Omega-9, where Vorthan fleets had surrounded the massive space station and taken over 3 million civilians hostage. She stood on the bridge of the UES Phoenix, watching the enemy ships position themselves around the hub like predators circling wounded prey. "They're demanding our complete surrender," reported Communications Officer Danny Walsh, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They say if we don't withdraw all human forces from galactic space within 6 hours, they'll destroy the trade hub and everyone on it." Lisa felt the familiar calm that came over her in crisis situations. This was what humans did best, she knew. When faced with impossible choices, they found third options that nobody else could see. The Vorthans expected either submission or reckless revenge, the only two responses they understood. They were about to learn that humans thought differently. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin Phase 7. Across the galaxy, human ships that had been hiding in empty space for decades suddenly became visible. Admiral Karen Phillips had planned for this moment since the first contact missions began. The Vorthans thought humans were limited to the few ships they had seen at the border encounters. They had no idea that human civilization had spent centuries preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. Automated defense platforms came online in systems the galactic powers had thought were uninhabited. Civilian freighters shed their disguises to reveal military vessels equipped with technologies that defied conventional physics. Space stations that had been dismissed as abandoned mining facilities activated defensive systems that surrounded them with energy fields stronger than planetary shields. But most surprising of all were the human agents who had been living among the four species for generations. Men and women who had worked as mechanics, teachers, traders, and researchers suddenly revealed themselves as coordinators of resistance movements. They had spent decades learning alien cultures, building relationships, and preparing for the day when humanity would need allies among the galactic populations. On Kalari Prime. Professor Martin Hayes activated a hidden transmitter in his university office where he had taught xenobiology for 30 years. His Kalari colleagues watched in amazement as he began coordinating evacuation procedures for research stations throughout their territory. They had known him as a brilliant but quiet scholar. They had never suspected he was human. In the Nexari corporate networks, financial analyst Susan Brooks simultaneously crashed the stock markets on 17 worlds while transferring the savings of ordinary citizens to protected accounts that the corporate princes could not touch. She had spent 20 years learning their economic systems from the inside, waiting for the moment when she would need to protect the common people from their own leaders' mistakes. Even on Threnody worlds, human agents emerged from deep cover to coordinate with moderate factions who had grown tired of their species' isolationist policies. Engineer Rick Palmer had spent 15 years maintaining their environmental systems, earning their trust through patient competence and quiet reliability. Now he was helping them evacuate vulnerable colonies before the war could spread to their territory. But it was at Omega-9 that the most dramatic demonstration of human capability took place. Captain Lisa Chen faced a tactical problem that should have been impossible to solve. The Vorthon fleet had positioned their ships so that any direct attack would result in massive civilian casualties. Traditional military doctrine suggested that rescue was impossible without acceptable losses. Humans had never accepted the concept of acceptable losses when it came to innocent lives. "Begin spatial distortion sequence," Lisa ordered. The human fleet around Omega-9 activated technology that the galactic species had never seen before. Instead of trying to fight through the Vorthon positions, the human ships created a localized fold in spacetime itself. It was not teleportation or faster-than-light travel, but something far more precise. They opened doorways that connected the interior of the trade hub directly to the cargo bays of human rescue vessels. Within hours, over 3 million civilians found themselves walking through glowing portals from their homes and workplaces on Omega-9 directly onto human ships, positioned light years away. Nexari, Kalari, Threnody, and even civilian Vorthons were evacuated with equal care and efficiency. The human rescue teams worked without regard to species politics or previous conflicts. War-Prime. Thakvar found himself commanding a fleet surrounding an empty space station. His hostages had vanished without explanation, his tactical advantage had disappeared, and his enemies had accomplished something his military strategists insisted was impossible. How did they do this? He demanded, his scaled face dark with rage and confusion. Sir? His science officer reported reluctantly. Our sensors show no sign of transport activity, no energy signatures consistent with mass teleportation, and no evidence of hidden escape routes. The civilians simply ceased to exist in their original locations and began existing in new ones. That's impossible. Yes, sir, the humans appear to specialize in impossible things. But Lisa Chen was not finished demonstrating human problem-solving methods. While the Vorthon fleet tried to understand what had happened to their hostages, human ships surrounded each enemy vessel with the same spatial distortion fields. Instead of destroying the Vorthon ships, they simply removed their weapons, shields, and propulsion systems, leaving the crews alive but completely helpless. The entire Vorthon assault fleet found itself drifting powerless in space, their weapons gone, their defenses down, but their life support systems functioning perfectly. It was the kind of surgical precision that should have required individual boarding actions and hand-to-hand combat. Instead, it had been accomplished without firing. A single shot. Vorthon fleet, Lisa broadcast on all frequencies. You are now prisoners of war. Medical teams are standing by to provide any assistance you require. Your crews will be treated according to your own codes of military honor. Please prepare to receive humanitarian aid. Thakvar stared at his dead control panels in disbelief. His warriors had been defeated without being harmed. His ships had been captured without being boarded. His tactical advantages had been turned into liabilities through methods he could not understand or counter. What do you want from us? He finally asked. We want to talk, Lisa replied simply. We want to end this war before it destroys the galaxy that all our species must share. We want to show you that strength and wisdom are not enemies, and that the strongest civilizations are built on cooperation rather than conquest. For the first time in his long military career, War Prime Thakvar found himself considering the possibility that there might be alternatives to victory and defeat. The humans had shown him something the Vorthon military mind had never conceived: the option of winning without destroying the enemy. Admiral Phillips's voice echoed across all human communication networks as reports came in from every front. Phase 7 complete. All civilian populations secured, all hostile forces neutralized, all friendly casualties at 0. Begin Phase 8. It's time to build something better. The new space station hung in neutral space like a gleaming symbol of hope, its rotating sections designed to accommodate the different environmental needs of all 5 galactic species. Admiral Karen Phillips stood in the central observation deck, watching construction crews from every corner of known space work together to complete humanity's greatest diplomatic achievement. They called it Unity Station, and it represented something that had never existed before in galactic history. A place where cooperation mattered more than competition. 6 months had passed since the crisis at Omega 9, and the galaxy had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. The old system of territorial boundaries and species-based politics was crumbling, replaced by something more complex but ultimately more stable. Instead of 4 separate empires barely tolerating each other, the galaxy was becoming a community of worlds working toward common goals. Commodore Jake Morrison, recently promoted from his position as captain of the Defiant, walked through the station's diplomatic quarters, where representatives from all 5 species lived and worked together. The sight still amazed him sometimes. Vorthon military advisors shared meals with Kalari researchers, discussing new approaches to planetary defense that combined warrior instincts with scientific precision. Nixari trade specialists worked alongside human economists to develop fair pricing systems that benefited producers and consumers equally. Even the normally isolationist Threnody had sent observers who were gradually learning to trust the cooperative process. The transformation had not been easy or automatic. Each species had struggled with concepts that challenged their fundamental assumptions about how civilizations should function. The Vorthons had needed time to understand that strength could be used to protect rather than conquer. The Kalari had learned that knowledge shared freely grew faster than knowledge hoarded jealously. The Nexari had discovered that cooperation could generate more wealth than competition. The Threnodi had begun to see that trust, carefully given, could provide better security than paranoid isolation. But perhaps the most important change was in how they saw themselves and each other. War Prime Thokvar, once the most aggressive advocate for Vorthon military expansion, now served as head of the Integrated Defense Council. His transformation had shocked everyone, including himself. The human approach to conflict resolution had shown him that true warriors protected all life, not just their own species. I spent decades believing that strength meant the ability to destroy enemies, he told Jake during one of their regular strategy sessions. You humans taught me that real strength means the ability to turn enemies into allies. It is a much harder skill to master, but far more valuable in the long term. The Kalari had embraced the new system with characteristic thoroughness, sending their best researchers to study human adaptability methods. Dr. Veltar, the ancient historian whose research had first identified the human myths, now led a joint research project aimed at understanding how cooperation could be built into the fundamental structures of civilization itself. Your species never lost the ability to grow and change, Veltar explained to Commander Nina Walsh during a tour of the new integrated laboratories. We Kalari became so focused on preserving knowledge that we forgot how to create new knowledge. Working with human researchers has reminded us that the best discoveries come from combining different perspectives rather than perfecting single viewpoints. Nina nodded as she watched mixed teams of humans and aliens working together on projects that would have been impossible for any single species to achieve alone. Human creativity sparked new ideas that Kalari patience and methodical thinking could develop into practical applications. The combination was producing technological breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. The economic transformation had been equally dramatic. The Nexari merchant princes had initially resisted human proposals for cooperative trade networks, fearing the loss of their competitive advantages. But when the new system began producing profits beyond anything they had imagined possible, even the most stubborn traditionalists became converts to cooperation. Trade Minister Kekstar, once a fierce defender of Nexari economic dominance, now worked closely with human economist Paul Torres to develop new models of interstellar commerce. Your people showed us that when everyone prospers, the total wealth increases exponentially, he admitted during a planning session for the new galactic trade routes. Competition creates winners and losers, but cooperation creates multiple winners. The mathematics are quite clear once you learn to calculate correctly. Even the Threnodi, despite their deep-seated suspicions, had begun to participate more actively in galactic affairs. Their representative, a careful individual known only as Observer Kligtar, had gradually moved from silent watching to active participation in council discussions. The patient human approach to building trust had finally reached even the most paranoid species in the galaxy. Your species does something we thought impossible, Kligtar told Captain Lisa Chen during a rare private conversation. You make yourselves vulnerable in order to build strength. It contradicts everything we learned about survival, yet somehow it works. We are still learning to understand this paradox. The military integration had proceeded more smoothly than anyone had expected. Commander Nina Walsh led the first mixed cruise in galactic history, with humans, Vorthons, Kalari, Nexari, and even some Threnodi working together on ships that combined the best technologies from all 5 species. The results were vessels that could fight if necessary, but were designed primarily for exploration and peaceful contact with unknown civilizations. Engineer Paul Torres had played a crucial role in developing the hybrid technologies that made cooperation possible. Instead of each species trying to prove their systems were superior, they had learned to combine their strengths while compensating for each other's weaknesses. Vorthon durability, Kalari precision, Nexari efficiency, Threnodi adaptability, and human flexibility created combinations that surpassed anything any single species had achieved alone. A's Admiral Phillips watched the final construction teams complete their work on Unity Station. She reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. The old system of careful balance and mutual distrust had given way to something messier, but ultimately more stable. There were still disagreements and conflicts, but they were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than threats and warfare. Captain Jake Morrison joined her at the observation window as the first joint exploration fleet prepared to depart for uncharted regions beyond known space. The ships in the fleet bore the flags of all 5 species and carried mixed crews trained in the new cooperative protocols. "Your people weren't myths," said a familiar voice behind them. Dr. Veltar approached slowly, his ancient frame supported by a mobility device that combined human engineering with Kalari power systems. "You were hope we didn't know we needed." Jake nodded, watching as ships crewed by former enemies worked together to chart new paths through the stars. "We learned something important during our years of isolation," he replied. "The strongest civilizations aren't built on the dominance of one species over others. They're built on the cooperation of many different kinds of people working toward common goals." The joint fleet activated their engines and began moving toward the edge of known space, carrying with them not just the combined technologies of 5 species, but something more valuable: the proven knowledge that cooperation was stronger than competition, that diversity was more powerful than uniformity, and that the future belonged to those who could learn to work together rather than fight apart. The age of territorial division had ended. The age of galactic unity had begun. And somewhere among the stars, other civilizations yet unknown would eventually learn what the 4 great species had discovered: that sometimes the myths are real, and sometimes they bring exactly what the galaxy needs most.